Friends, when I first started in ministry back in about 2012, the first congregation I served was having a knockdown, drag-out fight when I arrived. And everybody wanted to tell me about it. This was a 126-year-old Universalist congregation. And let me tell you, the battle lines were drawn. There were two extremely distinct camps. Nobody wanted to talk to each other. And I soon learned that on the one side, there were the folks who were advocating for bringing the spirit of life into the congregation and into the sanctuary by painting the walls a warm lilac color. And those who insisted that a bold aubergine was the only path towards spiritual wholeness. It turns out that we have extremely big feelings about our spiritual homes, whether it's the color of the paint or the words we use in our affirmations every week or who is a part of our congregation. So you can imagine that when the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America began the process of merging, there was a massive negotiation to determine what kind of church those two bodies were going to create together. At the first General Assembly in 1961, a group called the Commission on Merger presented a set of bylaws for the newly formed Unitarian Universalist Association. Among other things, those bylaws enumerated a set of what they called the UUA's corporate purposes, most of which will likely ring a bell to you if you are familiar with our contemporary principles. They included things like to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship, to implement our vision of one world by striving for a world community founded on ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace. We can maybe forgive them some of their sexist language in those early 60s days. But then there was number 3, to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships. Now, one of these things is not like the other. We watch a lot of Sesame Street in my house. One of the, out of those 6 purposes in the 1961 bylaws, that is the only one that leads with a religious belief. The supreme worth of every human personality and the dignity of man. This particular belief draws on the Universalist and Unitarian legacies, and it's what $1 million seminary word for this would be theological anthropology. It's what we believe about human nature. And our theological anthropology of inherent worth and dignity, rather than of depravity and sin, is what fundamentally separated liberal religion from other forms of Christianity for many hundreds of years. But then, from this grand, lofty, sweeping theological assertion that human nature is fundamentally good, the writers of those bylaws veer into a commitment to a particular form of governance. Listen to it again. To affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships. Why? It's an if-then statement. If we believe that humans are endowed with inalienable worth and dignity, then we must create institutions and societies in which every person is equally empowered to determine as a part of the collective what is best for all of the people. If the people are born with those twin blessings of agency and conscience, then they must be trusted to govern themselves. Neither the Universalists nor the Unitarians had mentioned democracy in their covenants and statements of belief before merger. But remember that this group arrived at the table in 1960, having just witnessed within the past 2 decades the global rise of fascism and authoritarianism, a world war that revealed the depths of human evil in the Holocaust and the unleashing of the atom bomb. They had lived through the hysteria of the Red Scare and McCarthyism, alongside the rising civil rights movement. So is it any wonder then that the original purposes boldly asserted a theological anthropology of inherent worth and dignity, intertwined with the commitment to the practice of democracy as the truest way to honor that understanding of human nature? At its root, democracy is an ancient and simple concept. If you want to travel with me to our etymology corner this morning, the word comes from the Greek demos, the people, and kratia, power, or rule. It just simply means a system of government by which the people rule themselves. Now, maybe the most famous definition of democracy is one that is usually attributed to Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address. If you had to memorize it like me, you'll recognize this. It ends that a government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. But did you know that Lincoln stole those words from a speech made 13 years earlier by the abolitionist Unitarian minister, the Reverend Theodore Parker? In 1850, at the New England Anti-Slavery Society Convention, Reverend Parker argued that the brutality of chattel slavery was directly at odds with what he called the American ideal. It had three parts. One, that all people are created equal. Two, they all have certain inalienable rights. And three, therefore, the government's job is to ensure that everyone can access and enjoy those rights. So he concluded in this 1850 speech, this idea demands a democracy. That is, a government of all the people, by all the people, for all the people. Now, Parker's original includes one very key word that Lincoln omitted, all. That omission could be the story of this nation, a country that aspires to liberty and justice for each and every one of its people, but whose leaders have consistently failed to create the conditions of possibility for such a reality. For those among us who are poor or undocumented or Black or Indigenous or people of color or trans or queer or female or disabled or, in the words of Langston Hughes, America never was America to me. But for Theodore Parker, and for so many political philosophers and theologians before and since, including Dr. King, whose legacy we celebrate this weekend, even though our society has yet to fully realize its promise, democracy remains our best hope for a truly equitable society with liberty and justice for all. Why? Again, because of our theological anthropology. While our Universalist and Unitarian traditions rejected the notion of original sin and depravity, we also acknowledge that humans can commit evil. But because of our deep belief that we are all born from that deep love that never lets us go, we believe that the people as a whole retain an unbreakable connection to that same source of goodness and creativity. Therefore, we trust neither Messiah nor monarch. Rather, we trust that the more of all the people who get to decide what is done to all the people, the more likely that we will err on the side of mutual care, support, and freedom for all the people. So it makes sense that democracy holds such a central place in modern day Unitarian Universalism. Our current principles include a commitment to affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Even though our society has yet to fully realize that promise, our UU theology proposes that robust democracy is both a religious practice and our best hope for a truly equitable society. Now, I don't need to tell you that democracy is under attack, both here in the US and across the globe. The strategy of the religious and radical right is to make it legal for a small group of people to control the bodies and restrict the agency of the rest of the people. But I want to suggest that the task of resuscitating, of reimagining, and of reincarnating democracy is fundamentally a religious one, and it is the most urgent of our time. As religious leaders and spiritual communities, our faith calls us to the holy work of building a society in which the potential in each of us is realizable by all of us. Now, I want to be clear, I am very much a cynic about the actual forms that democracy has taken thus far in human history. When it comes to both the state and the church, our reality has fallen wildly short of our aspirations. Our institutions are deeply flawed. But fortunately, the promise of democracy lies in a belief not that institutions are infallible, but that the people together will gravitate toward the common good. And collectively, we will always be better than the sum of our individual parts. In my paid work, I serve as the organizing strategy director for our modern day Unitarian Universalist Association, where I lead the team that holds all of the outward-facing justice work of the UUA under the banner of Side with Love and our related campaigns. In this work, I am reminded again and again that democracy is so much more than a political ideology or a system of governance. As a religious practice, the embodiment of democracy is a constant praxis of enlarging the we, collaboratively building a reality in which power is shared, self-determination is unfettered, and reverence for life, both individual and collective, is fundamental. My work reminds me that every day, in practice, the religious and spiritual engagement of democracy can look like our UU the Vote campaign that thousands of our siblings in faith, including many of you, I know, I see you, all those folks participated in this past cycle, writing letters and phone banking, knocking on doors, registering voters, fighting for our values at the ballot box. But democracy can also look like opening the doors of the congregation to a family of undocumented migrants or a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters that are fleeing the police. It can look like multi-faith coalitions, creating networks of hospitality and resources so that everyone can access abortion and gender-affirming care, even if they live in a state where it is currently illegal. Democracy can look like providing supplies and cooking meals and doing jail support and risking arrest alongside the water protectors. The spiritual practice of democracy can take many forms. Over and over again, my heart, my spirit feels saved by watching both Unitarian Universalists and our broader movements for justice keep showing up again and again, over and over, to create the conditions of possibility for all of us to thrive and be free. It is our shared work that I know in my bones that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, as Dr. King said so many years ago. From watching this work and from learning from it, I can distill 3 basic imperatives for practicing democracy as a collective spiritual discipline and a religious act. And because I'm a preacher, I'm going to share them all with you here before we end. First, we have to commit to that which is worthy of our ultimate loyalty. 9 years before that of All the People speech, Theodore Parker famously spoke of the transient and permanent in Christianity, in which he basically admonished the church to stop squabbling over forms and doctrine and to refocus on this worldly praxis of embodying love for the divine by enacting love for our human siblings. Nearly 2 centuries later, we might reimagine that clarion call as a command to let go of the forms that no longer serve us and to focus on new structures, new practices that allow us to better embody our values in the world. Right now in our faith, as I'm sure some of you know, we are once again having a lively conversation about Article 2 of our bylaws. We're being invited to ask ourselves, will we cling to the beloved and familiar words of our 7 principles, Or will we be open to new wisdom, willing to re-articulate our values and our commitments to ring out more clearly, more compellingly for this new century? The conversation invites us to ask too, is it the words that we say or the deeds that we do and the risks that we take that most fully express the heart of our faith? Number two, we have to have a broader field of vision than just what happens in our individual congregations. Our collective human and ecological crises will not wait for us while we're busy squabbling over whether we can borrow from the endowment or restructure the program council or even change the words of Article 2. If more of our congregational energy is going towards maintaining our own institutions than towards building the world as it should be, then we have failed. The natural, faithful response to the blessing of being endowed with both freedom and dignity is to find your people in community, to build relationships of trust, and to collectively and courageously take up the work of fighting for a world in which all of us are free and flourishing. And finally, number three, we have to take shifts for the revolution. Any of you who have ever been on a webinar with me through Side with Love have probably heard me say this. Dr. King famously preached that we must stay awake through the Great Revolution. And at the risk of arguing with Dr. King, I want to suggest that maybe the revolution is going to go on long enough that we're going to need a nap somewhere along the way. The enterprise of incarnating the beloved community is work that we are neither solely responsible for nor exempt from engaging. We have to be awake enough to find the intersection of the world's need with our skills and our passions. And as religious leaders, we must help others discern theirs too. It can be making art, organizing your neighborhood, raising money, building the spreadsheet or the website. It can be running for office, providing childcare, or getting arrested at the direct action. But every single one of us has to find our place, connect with our people, expand our comfort zone, and take our shift. And when we're done, we got to go rest and pray and let ourselves be held and cared for so that we are ready to clock in when the next shift starts. Beloveds, the urgency is overwhelming. The heartbreak is unrelenting and the stakes are unfathomably high. But like our religious ancestors, our faith reminds us that even in the face of all the brokenness, the biggest possible we, the beloved community of all the people, by all the people, for all the people, that is an aspiration worthy of our fiercest commitment and our deepest loyalty. The spiritual practice of embodying, building, and fighting for true democracy is a source of hope and a path toward our collective liberation. May we be blessed, each and all of us, as we build together. May it be so. Blessed be Ashe and Amen.